Again. So hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, Minding the Gaps in Circular Textile to Textile Opportunities. It's so great to see that this topic has gained such interest from around the world, obviously, which hopefully means that textile to textile recycling is not only a currently trendy topic, but will indeed support the transformation of our industry, a transformation that is so needed. Just a heads up. We will be recording, and we are already recording this webinar and make available later on our website. We will also share the presentation, but may we take also this opportunity to point you to our website, where you will find lots of interesting stuff, but especially under the segment called Intelligence, you will find all our past reports and white papers. And also for easy and quick access, we have a pop-up window. When you come to the home page and you click on this window, it will directly lead you to our reports. So any questions you have throughout the webinar, please place them into the chat box, and we will try to either answer them in this hour or get back to you after our webinar. So my name is Petra Schweiger. I'm the program manager of Accelerating Circularity Europe, and I'm based in Austria. Next slide, please. So today we would like to go back a little bit to 2019, 2020 for a very brief moment when Accelerating Circularity in its early days was researching the potentials for circular supply chains, especially in the US. At that time, we were trying to answer very basic questions. How can a circular system look? Who could be the participants? What would we do? Where, and so on. And now, more than 2 years later, we are in the middle of the ACP US actual pilot phase. And here in Europe, we have just completed the first half of the ACP project by researching, mapping, modeling, and linking the circular system for textile to textile recycling. And we're about to go into the trial phase. And so we thought it's a great moment to look back at where we started and see what has changed. I'm also joined today by my colleagues Janel Twogood, project manager of our US project, as well as Sarah Coulter, ACP project fellow. And before we continue, we would like to run a quick poll. Considering you all dialed in for this webinar, it's safe to assume that you all sit somewhere along the value chain of textile to textile recycling. And just to have an overview and the segment representation, let's run the poll, please. So I'm going to launch it. So which value chain segment is your organization in? So, okay, we have a lot of brands and retailers joining, a lot of others as well. Okay, we'll give it a couple of more seconds. So, okay. So great, thank you so much. We have almost half of it brands and retail, which is great because we definitely need to boost the demand for recycled fiber. We come to that a little bit later. So next slide, please, Alina. So who is Accelerating Circularity? We are a not-for-profit collaborative effort to, as the name suggests, accelerate circularity. While, of course, we recognize the importance and the various hierarchies of circularity approaches, such as resell, repair, remake, we specifically look at textile to textile recycling. So no matter how many times the item was resold, repaired, reconstructed, at one point, of course, the material should go into a recycling stream. And this already leads us to our vision and mission statements. although it's no longer about envisioning a world where textiles remain in continuous use. That's what we want, and that's what we need to establish systems that will use the embedded value and resources in existing spent textiles for new products. And in short, to also divert textiles from landfill and incineration. Next slide, please. So to date, we run projects in these regions, and I'd like to hand over to Janel, please.
Thank you, Petra, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Janel Twogood, and I am the project manager for the US trials at Accelerating Circularity. The trials here in the US are inclusive of about 12 separate trials. We have over 10 brands participating, some of whom are on this slide that you see here, showing our steering committee, who we're very grateful to for helping us to plot out, our mission, our vision, and how we're going to get there. We're working with not only brands, but also with recyclers, and some of whom you see there on the screen. Some of the biggest brands and yarn spinners and fabric producers as well here in our region. Most of the trials that we're running are touching locally in the US. We're very happy to have US-based manufacturers participating. Also, some of the scope goes out into North America, so namely Mexico and into Central America. Also very grateful to the Walmart Foundation for providing generous funding for the project. And it's really been a blessing to have the opportunity to bring all these different stakeholders around such an important issue as trying to revalorize these materials that are otherwise ending up in our landfills.
Thank you very much, Janel. So when we look at Europe, our regional scope, of course, includes the EU 27, but then also several non-EU countries such as Norway, Switzerland, and the UK, and also the manufacturing belt around the region, including Morocco, Tunisia, and especially also Turkey, which is a very important manufacturing hub in our region. So at the core, at the heart of all our project is always a steering committee. So here in Europe, you see it has organizations from along the value chain. So we start with collectors and sorters like TexAid from Switzerland, Recyclertex, which is an umbrella organization from the UK. We cover recyclers from mechanical to chemical. We have organizations like the GSZ, WWF joining, and especially also our brand members, the likes of Inditex and Zalando. We would like to go to the next slide, please, Alina. So just to give you an overview of how we work, our regional projects go over a period of approximately 2 years always. And in short, these are our methodology steps. So of course, we spend time of researching, mapping the existing systems. So how does collection and sorting look? What about pre-processing? Is there any pre-processing available? What about the landscape, the infrastructure of the high quality recyclers? What are their input requirements? What are the outputs? How do traditional supply chains integrate into these systems? And what are brands' demands, of course? Of course, we identify gaps and also throughout that work. And then with this knowledge, we then model the new circular value chain systems and we link up these segments. And since as an organization, we are very action oriented and also very hands-on, we put a lot of focus and effort into the pilot phase where we eventually pressure test these systems at scale. And as I mentioned already, throughout our work and throughout these months, we identify gaps, and very often gaps and opportunity are different sides of the same issue. And good news, very often also these gaps create opportunities. So before I hand over to Sarah, who will be moderating the next segment of our webinar, I'd like to run another quick poll. So let me go on with this. So the question will be, what do you see as the biggest gap for a circular system for textile to textile recycling to work? Just a few more words to it. This is, of course, not a complete list, but it does go back to our early day research. We dug up at that research again because ourselves were very curious to see, is it still this way? What have we learned? Or has there been any progress industry-wide? So we're going to give it a couple of seconds. Okay. So the majority is going for scale and availability of sorting, hard part removal, right sizing. That's a very good answer. Okay. So thanks so much also for participating in here. Yes, as I said, majority goes for pre-processing. That's really one of the pain points we see all across in every region so far, for sure. What else do we have? Missing data of volumes. Clearly, data is always a big word. Missing, we don't really know what's out there. Lack of policy legislation. So I can speak about Europe, of course, where there is a lot coming. That's great. But we would like to go into this next segment where Sarah and Janel and we will be answering some of the questions in here. So next slide, please. And may I hand over to Sarah?
Sure, thanks, Petra. Again, welcome everyone. So what you're looking at here is a summary of some of the early work that we did when we were thinking about what are the gaps in the system and how do they translate into opportunities. And so before we dive into this, what would we revise? What have we learned so far? What is this, what do these lists look like now? I'd like, if you can, both Janel and Petra, can you very, very quickly give us a snapshot of where the trials are in the US and in Europe right now, just so that everyone on the phone understands kind of where we are?
Sure, I can go first. So we have gotten all the stakeholders together around several different tables. We are, so we've identified, as I said before, I think it's 12 unique trials. We're running yarns for those trials in different blends and different sizes. We're not going any finer than a 20 singles yarn in any given trial. But there's one exception, we may be getting to 30 singles in a single additional effort. But we're running blends of cotton with ratios of post-consumer and post-industrial cotton fiber. We're running 100% cotton, we're running cotton polyester blends. And those blends and we're 100% cotton yarns are going into different size yarns that'll go and that'll be applied to denim. We've got 3 different denim or woven projects. And then we've got, and that's with cone denim. We've got t-shirt trials that are running and also a fleece trial. We're also applying some 100% cotton recycled with about 30% recycled content in a home towel trial. And another one that we're very excited about is a workwear trial with a woven polyester cotton blend. So, we're working with 10 brands, 3 different spinning partners, 4 different fabric suppliers, and the minimum that we're having everybody meet. One of the big parts of the US trials that are about scale is that we are doing all of these trials where we're meeting the minimums across the supply chain. So most of the trials were meeting a minimum of an equivalent of 10,000 units that'll come out of any given trial. So 10,000 units of denim, 10,000 units of t-shirts, fleece, towels, etc. Is that quick enough?
Great, thanks. And Petra, I know, in Europe, you guys are at a little different place, but I wonder if, as you're telling us about where the European trials are headed, maybe you can also sort of point out any differences that you are already beginning to see in how the work will unfold there.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yes. So the US team is a bit ahead of us, but we are gradually catching up. So the European project started last year, right before summer. So going through the methodology again, we spent months in working groups. We had in total 80 plus organizations joining our regular working groups of Spin Textile, where we were bringing together collectors, sorters, and the recyclers, and then another 30 companies of brands and retailers, where we were really trying to understand what are their pain points, what are the gaps and the challenges to set up the system that we envision. So we completed that phase. We, of course, had a lot of learnings, great in-depth discussions around the topic. And now we're heading into the trial. So we officially launched the trial phase 2 weeks ago. And we are starting with the workshops in 2 weeks. So that is super exciting. We have, I can't mention too many organizations joining yet, but we have around 40 today that are going to join. So one of the differences is really here that while the US is already working on the actual product categories, we still kept it a little bit open. We are going to have a workshop called Cellulosic, where we have the mechanical recyclers in there and also some of the chemical ones for cellulose. We have collectors and sorters and brands accordingly as well that will be looking into categories of cut and sew circular knits and also very basic woven items. And next to it, we're going to have a workshop that is fully dedicated on polyester. Clearly, that's one of the big challenges of our industry, to gradually move away from bottle flake. This will be a dedicated workshop for textile to textile recycling polyester, where we have chemical recyclers for polyester in, we have thermomechanical also joining, and a lot of outdoor brands that are really pushing for the change and the transition.
Excellent. Can you speak a little bit more about why the groups, sort of organized themselves so differently? Is that driven mostly by the brands, or did something come out in the early research phases that made that make more sense? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, it highly depends also how these value chains for the trials, the system trial partners build up then eventually. So as I mentioned, we had 80 plus companies joining the working group. So eventually also looking at the value chain that is feasible and that is joining our system trials. That's how we really regrouped and also everybody. And this is how it's turning out. It's the cellulosic one. But I am also very confident that it's gonna break down a little bit further than over time. So I mentioned the various categories of cut and sew circular knits and also woven items, but we will be able also to offer a value chain for denim, for example, and also home textiles if it's required.
Really interesting. Janel, can I come back to you for a moment? You mentioned, the yarn sizes and the blends that these products will be able to have in the US trials. And I know that figuring that out has been quite a process. Can you speak a little bit about that? What that looked like, sort of negotiating that and working that out between, sort of everyone all at once?
Sure. So I probably failed to mention that, the recycling technologies that that are embedded in the trials are with partners that are doing mechanical polyester, as well as mechanical cotton refiberization. We've also got a chemical polyester partner providing a chip in partnership with a mechanical polyester recycler who's able to take that chip and extrude it into new yarns. We're also working with a man-made cellulosic company who's providing recycled man-made cellulosic to the trials. So right away, we're faced with quite a variety of different kinds of outputs and inputs that these different recycling technologies represent. And because of the nature of a polystaple being what it is, different than the nature of a cotton staple yarn, being different from a man-made cellulosic yarn, and many unknowns. So trying to cover, right, all these technologies, along with being opportunistic in terms of really keeping it simple, in terms of the product that we were aiming for, the types of yarns that we're aiming for. We spent a lot of time in workshops doing what the project does best, which is asking questions of the stakeholders, and depending on their answers and their expertise and what they believed is possible, we created targets. So all of the trials basically are targets. So, we might have a 60-40, like a 100% cotton t-shirt, for example, with 60% virgin, 40% recycled content in it. And that 40% of that cotton t-shirt, is a blend of a post-industrial and a post-consumer input. And, we've left it, and that's just one example where we've left it as a target. We're going to run those fibers through, labs and tests, and then ultimately, hopefully, we'll get to the point where we're running it at scale with our spinners. But we've always put it out there that, it's a trial, and therefore, if the experts who are running these materials feel as though they need to adjust, they'll have the artistic license, so to speak, to do that, because they know what can run on the machines. And the aim, right, is to figure out what can be collected, what can be provided, what's appropriate for these systems, and then what can be run through at scale, right? Not just at a sort of laboratory type, sample room type level. So we kind of came up with these formulas across all of the trials. They vary by several metrics. They vary by the objective of the yarn size. The finer the yarn, the sort of more challenging it may be to maximize the recycled content. So we made adjustments there. In other cases, where the technology is promising to afford a higher level of recycled content, we're aiming for even 100%. And then the blends within, those scenarios, sometimes it's 100% of one material, like 100% chemically recycled polyester would be a target. In other cases, it's 100% recycled content, but some of it may have, some of it is recycled cotton, some of it is bottle-based PET, which is already commercial and we know how it runs, and then some of it is recycled polyester, which is really more of a trial.
Interesting. I like this concept that you mentioned, that the specs that we're working toward are really targets. They're not pass fail. That they're somewhat still malleable as we move through the trials, and can be tweaked as we learn more about what performs well, or how a certain thing behaves. And taking that idea back to this gaps and opportunities list here, I wonder if there's anything that you can share that we've already learned in this vein. What has needed to be tweaked? What is really, sort of holding us up? Just at a high level, how does this approach fit in with this idea of gaps and opportunities?
So one thing, right, is that depending on the type of recycling process, the feedstocks that are required and the processing for those feedstocks required, it really differs. So, one thing that's important is, as we set targets, we're seeing what can be produced in terms of feedstocks, what's and measuring along the way, what's efficient, what's not efficient. An example, though, I could give that's pretty concrete, for instance, is polyester textile feedstocks for mechanical recycling. We can afford to take in different colors, mixed colors. We can afford to take in mixed fabrications, for example. So, the input is sort of fairly open, relatively speaking, to something like mechanical cotton, wherein the color that's going into that recycling fiberization process remains the color and will influence the dyeability later, not to mention chemistries and other things. And so that need to be mindful of the color going into, say, a cotton recycled product, could set up dynamics for the sorters and collectors, wherein, cotton, so that it's got the most robust chance of being dyed to many different colors, that puts aside a lot of colors that may qualify as cotton, so that we need to think about, how to utilize everything. In addition, so far, what we have been specifying for the US trials on the mechanical cotton side also has a limitation in construction. We are specifying, knits at this point, because wovens are not really a viable input for the processes that happen in mechanical cotton recycling. The fibers just get too short. So it's very interesting to see, how the outputs, technologies, and then what we need to specify for the inputs, how that's a dance of things that we're learning along the way and adjusting as we go.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. And I want to come back in a bit to some of the market dynamics that are also at play, but I think it would be useful, actually. Petra, can you talk about the feedstock requirements, what the inputs and outputs look like generally in Europe, and perhaps I think a little bit of the regulatory context and the EU waste hierarchy would be useful touch points in this. I think it's a nice framing, and then we can possibly have a broader discussion about this big topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. It's a good point, because the EU is very clear on the waste hierarchy, and we always joke that it's really in the blood of the collectors and sorters, meaning that whenever they sort feedstock, clearly the priority is for reuse, for domestic market or export markets. And then fractions go into downcycling. It's of course easier also to sort for downcycling. There are existing markets, there is an existing customer base, there are business relations. So it's easy to do that. But then fraction that can't go anywhere, Today, that is the fraction that is meant for recycling, but clearly that's not the fraction that is required for all our high quality recyclers of mechanical and chemical. So that's that's the imbalance already. That is a big gap and a big challenge also when we talk about the feedstock flows. So we spent a lot of time in our working group with the collectors and sorters and the recyclers to really understand the various feedstock requirements. We understand that every recycler has very specific and also rather individual specifications. So for a sorter, being able to really sort for all the different requirements, that's another challenge, of course. So we were trying to understand how to really overcome that, and also working on what does consistent delivery mean for both sides, because it's clear that the recyclers, they need to keep on going. It's not said that one shipment is enough for them. They are building up capacities over time. At the same time, it goes to the sorter as well. So a material order here and there, it's not gonna cut it either. So they need continuous orders in the same way. So the delivery patterns are very important. So volumes are important and consistency. We've also, of course, identified, and we all know that it's very important to sort according to composition. So the accuracy is also very important of the materials. We are going also the next steps already for mechanical recyclers. It's clearly very important to have some kind of understanding of the chemicals, dyestuffs, finishings, because it's all possibly contaminates their output. This is even also important for the chemical recycler. So we're nowadays not only talking about missing data on waste streams and what are the fiber types, but we really need to go a couple of levels lower. What are the dyes? What are the chemicals? What are the finishings? In terms of decolorizing, in terms of purity of the feedstock, and thus also the output, that's super important questions. So we spend really a lot of time theoretically talking about it. And now in these trials, that's when we're gonna test it out across the region and across the value chain.
So what early opportunities do you see, you know, on the question of, you know, dealing with chemicals and dyes and things of this nature? Are there systems that you've seen that are potentially solutions in this space? What do you think? What do you envision happening around that?
So yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure if I have a great answer to that. We, of course, so everybody speaks always about traceability transparency. Yes, so for one, we work with a couple of providers. We have partnered up with Reverse Resources to really, for one, make these waste stream visible and have potentially understanding about all these criteria as well. It's very clear that the recyclers now, when we speak very often about the small scales, about pilots for one-offs, it's all possible. But if we're really going to flows, if we want to scale up, then these will be the issues. So what we internally for our pilots, clearly we go into fiber and yarn testings as well when it comes to RSL, but clearly there will need to be solutions across the value chain. So we see a couple of technologies coming up. We see when it comes to accuracy, clearly there are much better sorting facilities nowadays. There are various technologies. We see also the potential of, like, nowadays it's manual sorting is still the norm. But clearly it has to be complemented with any kind of technology. So we see this also working together. There is a lot of pilot plants around. We're also partnered up with TOMRA on their NIR technology. So yes, there is opportunity, and that also needs to be tested at scale. So that's one of the more important things for the next few months.
Thanks. So this idea of scale and volumes and material flows keeps coming up. And Janel, I know that you have thought a lot about this, and especially in the US, it's a really big challenge, just the production volumes and how that, travels upstream through the value chain. Can you talk a little bit about those dynamics and how that's influencing our work in the trials?
Yeah, so I mean, Petra alluded to it, right? This concept of wanting to get to feedstock flows that feed, literally, a continuous production stream. When we're talking about continuous production streams, I mean, many of you have a grasp on the phone here, I'm sure, about what kinds of numbers, what kinds of volumes we're talking about. But I'll just, make sure that we get it out there. I mean, US, just US based producers, say, for instance, yarn producers, we're looking at, production numbers that are in the realm of 17 million pounds per week here in the US. Other producers are looking at 4 million pounds per week, 75 million pounds annually. The recyclers also need to operate at scale. Again, like it cannot be a batch operation. They need to run things continuously. And one of the interesting things that's coming up, I think really interesting to think about, is part of that sort of continuous operational running of the machinery. Part of what is a tool in the toolkit that we are learning about and need to see how this will work. And I do also think it touches even on the question of the RSLs and understanding, what's going to be the output from the inputs we're dealing with, is this concept of being able to blend, right? I talked about how even on the specs, we're very consciously looking at blends. We need to have, for instance, some virgin carrier fibers or some known aspect of any output yarn. We need to have carrier fibers to understand, to carry certain recycled fibers in the case of polyester, in the case of cotton. But it's also true if there's a cotton poly blend, it's useful to have a polyester staple fiber to carry the shorter average of fibers coming out of a cotton, mechanical cotton recycling process. So these blends, even at the spec level of the yarns, are very important. But we're finding also that when the recyclers are running feedstocks through, that they also are blending right at that point in time. And so, from a feedstock flow and a scale point of view, as well as like a data point of view, they've really got to be very clear that the feedstock providers, AKA the collector sorters and pre-processors, are delivering things that are known, that we can say, this is what this is what's in it. On a consistent basis. It can't be that everything has to be core tested at every delivery. That's no production process operates that way. Of course, when we're kicking this all off, we're going to be testing carefully, but we have to have our eye on that idea of getting to the point where we can run things in the same way or very close to the same way as they are for current production processes.
Yeah, and I would like to add also from the EU side. So we talk about volumes a lot, but when we go on to the brand side, we should also not forget that in the EU, and I'm referring to statistics from 2019 from Eurotex, that 99.8% of companies in the EU textile and apparel industry, that also includes manufacturers, not only brands, but 99.8% are SMEs. So these are small and medium-sized companies, the majority even so-called micro companies, meaning that they will need to have access as well. And they will not be able to buy these volumes. They will not be able to provide these volumes. So, but in total, they make the mass as well, and they create volume. So it is very important, as Janel is saying, that we create the consistency, and also in terms of materials that are replicable, basic, initially in categories that are widely used to really create that mass.
That's great. Janelle, it sounded like you had something to add on that. Did I?
It'll come back to me. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, I think this this idea that the geographic context and the market context has so much influence is really interesting. Petra, are there any other things that have come to light as you begin to work on the trials in Europe that you think are going to make that workflow different in some ways from the US?
Yeah, one thing I would like to say also, because we keep on having these conversations also in our group a lot, so working with the European value chain, and especially also then again brands, I think brands are already very firm when it comes to designing for recyclability. So a lot of the brands in Europe, they understand their recycler infrastructure in the landscape, and they have an understanding what can go into these recycling streams. But we've also realized that while talking a lot about end of life, waste management, take backs, which is important to turn off the tap, but it's equally important to really design from recycled. And for one, yes, legislation is probably gonna come in. If you have followed, the Commission has published a strategy, and within eco-design regulations, they are talking about mandatory minimums for recycled content. So what I'd like to say is that designing from recyclers, really understanding what the outputs are, what the limitations are, that Janel was mentioning, what can be done. Is it fiber? Is it gonna be chip? Where is it gonna end up, in what kind of yarn spinning, extrusion, and so on, to work with these output materials? That is really important. And I feel that this is still, there is still a bit of a knowledge gap around as well. And here with our pilots, that's exactly where we would like to start off again. It's designing for recyclability, it's going to be a given, but designing from recycled and really making use of the output materials, that's very important. Because if there is no demand, how can there be supply?
I mean, one really good example of that approach, right, is that when we look to recycle polyester textile through mechanical means, it's great. We can take in mixed colors, we can take in mixed constructions, mixed compositions, as long as they're polyester. The thing is, the process itself yields quite an unattractive color, if you want to call it a color at all. And really the solution to making that output polyester, which can be turned into staple as well as into filament, is to solution dye it black. And so that's a very, in my opinion, pretty easy to at least wrap one's head around, that, that input or that process of mechanical polyester, which has great promise and some legs underneath it already in terms of scale, has that caveat. So let's get ready to use a lot of black polyester.
And now that brings up something that we've been sort of joking about internally over the past months, which is how can we simplify the specifications of our finished goods to account for these kinds of things? Does every brand need its own special solution dyed black, or can we all just sort of say, this is circular black, You're welcome. Can you speak a little bit about how that might begin to shape up in a future where we have scale design from recycling?
Well, there's so much to say about that, right? I mean, the first thing, where to start? First of all, yeah, I forget, somebody I was speaking to last week said that just the concept of limiting or coming to an agreement on something like a solution dye black from a process like mechanical polyester would be, quote, a game changer. That's pretty interesting that, we know that it's hard to get people to align, especially over subjective things like color. However, if we are hearing from the industry that's trying to provide, solutions to these needs and commitments, that's at the same time a pretty understandable objective. And so that in turn, opens up this other area that's just so critical to succeeding in developing an infrastructure for textile to textile recycling, which is learning how to cooperate and collaborate. We are seeing so much collaboration through the project. As Petra was talking about, we're hosting these working sessions. We have different focus groups, looking at all different parts and pieces of the infrastructure, from brands through to collector sorters, recyclers, and then sometimes even more technical specialty groups, also, always mindful of the economics. So I think that there's willingness to come around the table. And I think it's really important that we all sort of recognize that it's new. I've heard from a lot of brands, that this is a really novel environment to come together with other brands working, certainly working on product together across brands is very novel. And so I think we should be mindful that learning how to collaborate and what we need to collaborate around and seeking that input from industry on what will help them to fulfill the goals, right, to meet the targets, whether they're targeted specs, targeted, recycled content, targeted volumes. We need to be all ears, and that's an opportunity for us all.
And we have already a great input from Bernie. Hi, Bernie. It's great to hear from you. So Bernie Thomas is a collector sorter from the UK, and he came back with circular black may then not be recognized by infrared fiber sorting. So advising us to take care in these design decisions. And that's exactly what also all our collaborations are about. By bringing everybody to the table and having these conversations, and everybody has a voice and can chip into these decisions. That's exactly what we are trying to do here. Thanks, Bernie. So, but we also have a couple of more questions. Janel, question to you. To what degree are these technical tests and observations about feedstock and their behavior during recycling and repurposing documented and available?
Yeah, so we are in the pilot stage in the US. We are just starting to move materials through the system, and that's just at the test level to start. We will be moving, as I have mentioned, materials at bulk quantities shortly. But so we don't have results ready to share yet. We are producing results in terms of what we're running through the value chains in line with the targeted specs and yarns. So that being said, one of the things that will be coming out of these trials, we will be running evaluations and assessments really all the way through testing. There's another question about testing, I think, embedded in that question. So we will be testing at different stages for performance and RSLs, and that will be rolled up, into our report out when we're done with the trials. But we're not wanting to just stop at providing a sort of report on our work. the goal we have is to turn the knowledge that we gain, the results that we learn, the concerns that we hear into tools of different kinds, whether they're, it's mapping of inputs and outputs, whether it's, sort of baselines of how things tested and how does that compare to maybe average testing landscapes for similar products. What else? Some idea of even just lists of, what we were able to produce in terms of yarn sizes and blends, contents, etc. Anything we learn about, dyeing limitations or just learnings there, so whatever we learn from the trials based on going through all those stages, from the collection to the pre-processing, through the recycling, onto the spinning, into the knitting and weaving, and then forward to that dyeing and finishing process. That's all of those learnings from each of those stages will become, the edge or the head of some tool or another that we are planning to build to provide out to industry, and that will be made public.
Thanks, Janel. And maybe I can pass the next question from Julie on that topic, also what you just mentioned, to Sarah. Could you share somehow, specifically from academia, how academia could be supporting with data analysis and validation? So Sarah was working on our data collection tool. So maybe you would like to take that question?
Sure. We need, if any, yes, we need a lot of help. We are, we've been generating a lot of information and data from the beginning of the project. And as we move, and get more in depth into the trials, there's just data being generated at volumes that, as a very small team, we need help coping with and transforming into knowledge and tools. So I think, the data analysis and validation, there are a number of aspects of that where I think academic partners and others can definitely play a role and would be, very helpful. Things like, performance testing, although, we do have partners that are helping us with that, as we continue with the work, we'll need more of that. The RSL issues, we have some work going on where we are evaluating in a very high level directional way, trying to identify what the hotspots might be in this new system, so that we can, in our future iterations of this work, remediate them, or be able to say, well, this piece of the system works quite well and can scale. This piece is a bit of a roadblock. And so supporting that kind of, sort of baseline setting, helping us formulate the right questions as we move into later stages impact evaluation, both of the qualities of the products that we are making in these trials and of our own programmatic work. We can absolutely use help with all of that. And so if you would like to reach out after, that would be great. We would love to take that discussion further.
And I just want to add, Sarah, that there's always the sort of the product, right? There's the technical side of things. There's that aspect of this work. Sitting right alongside of that work always is the modeling, the linking up, of companies, of people, of technologies and their processes, their operations, their access, their funding. I mean, there's all that side of things too. And we've been, creating those models, right, of what we can potentially make, but not just what we can make, also who can make it, who needs to be involved, how many steps are there. So we have already between the US and the European project, I think in that data bank, we've got a lot of information, a lot of people in a sort of web, right? In this, you know, trying to be born, we like to say trying to be born all at once, this circular textile to textile supply chain with, you know, I'm calling them people now. I also like to think of them as organs of the body. You know, we need to have something born whole, which is this infrastructure from the collecting, sorting, all the way through to the finished product that is called textile to textile recycling, that is inside of an environment that involves, you know, existing businesses of all kinds, from brands to resale. But within that body that needs to be born, there are different organs, and they all have different functions, they all have different requirements, they all have different intelligences, and they are all necessary for this body to live.
Well put, Janelle. And actually, that reminds me of something I wanted to come back to. You know, in this organ and all of the organs in it that need to all function, and going back to the waste hierarchy, you know, we think about and talk about cascades and flows of material and how they cycle through the many lives they might have. What is the role in this new system for downcycling, and how does the work that we are doing in textile to textile recycling influencing that? What dynamics are at play there? Because we're essentially trying to stick a new sector into the hierarchy between the reuse, resale, et cetera, and the downcycling. So what can you speak at all to the influence that the downcycling market has on the development of this new feedstock, and conversely, how this new product may influence the downcycling market?
Shall I go? I guess I'll go, Petra. It might be different, and I don't know how different it is in Europe, but so a couple of things, right? I mean, for one, in the waste hierarchy, you know, we identify a sort of middle section that includes downcycling. I mean, that's what a lot of people understand it as. Actually, the industry itself doesn't refer to it as downcycling, they refer to it as recycling. And the folks that are in that space include, you know, wiper producers, rag producers, as well as shoddy producers. Those are very ancient. Shoddy certainly is an ancient craft that's been around for many, many really centuries now. So that's a reality, right? That's a business that's out there, and you know, and they're very efficient, and their outputs have a value to them. And so there's a couple key things. I mean, for one, textile to textile recycling, sitting right next to those two processes as a sort of third process, potentially could be seen as competition. We have to be mindful of that. Also, the potential is that through the kinds of sorting and pre-processing learnings or abilities, capabilities that we think textile to textile recycling will engender, potentially could create a sort of cascade that's beneficial to those industries, just because we'll know that the needs of the recyclers is such that we will need to know more about what's coming in. We will need to get smarter about what can and can't be sorted. So there's that side of it, which is sort of the data transparency, understanding the materials side of it. In addition to that, though, another important thing is that not everything that we collect and prepare as feedstocks, not everything's going to be qualified to become a feedstock for textile to textile recycling that's going to end up in yarns. For everything that we sort into an actual feedstock for those processes, you know, anytime you sort anything out, there's always going to be a quote byproduct of identifying something that, you know, is a category. And we will benefit, the whole system is going to benefit from having many categories, many places for things to go, many markets, in a way. That's what that translates to. So for every, you know, for every cascade, for every sort, there's, you know, there's going to be a byproduct, something that just isn't qualified for recycling. And in many cases, those things could still qualify for other kinds of products that just aren't going into yarn. They're just outside of our focus, which is specifically textile to textile. But shoddy, wipers, that's one area. Lots of people are doing additional kinds of design and innovation in that space, using, you know, things that reusing materials in new and novel ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I believe since we've come up to the hour, and I've noticed some folks are beginning to drop off, I think maybe, you know, in just the last couple of minutes, can both of you, you know, take a look back at this list of gaps and opportunities, where we have come since we initially generated this, and maybe just quickly, can each of you say what is the biggest gap and an opportunity for each of you as you take this work forward?
So I can start off. So first of all, it's clear that all of those ones are totally interconnected. So I'm not even sure if it's so possible to say what's the biggest gap. But when we look at the European landscape, we have infrastructure there. So that is existing, that is scaling, that is really growing and taking on new capacities over the next 5-10 years. What's important is really that linking up the different segments. So I think that's going to be very crucial, and to make these flows happening over the next few years.
Janel?
Yes, I think that it's the same in the US. The flows of the materials, that's the biggest hurdle. Learning how to reverse engineer production. You know, we're producing, but in reverse, you know, bringing back things that were out in the wild, as we call it, and figuring out how to bring them in as raw materials to a new production process. That's really, and to do that in flow, at scale, in volumes, at costs that everybody agrees is workable. And so, you know, on the US side, I'll only add that cost is also a factor. We need to learn what we can do, and we need to learn it quickly. And we know that cost is a factor, but we're trying to push the possible first. The cost will follow.
Excellent. Any final thoughts before we close? I'll hand it back to Petra.
No, thanks so much for joining, everyone. If we just scroll to the next slide, please, it's just a thank you. If you are interested in joining our pilots, please reach out to us, Janel for the US ones, me for the European ones. But with that, I would like to thank everyone for attending. Thanks so much, and have a great evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Great questions. Thank you.